Students, we have seen in the last two sessions what is the importance of sex structure in understanding the overall population composition, its societal impact and so on. We have also keenly looked at the sex ratio at birth in the context of India as well as its pattern and what are the issues which emanate from the sex ratio at birth. We will now shift our attention to the yet another important aspects of sex ratio, which is the sex ratio of the child or child sex ratio. Why child is important when compared to the sex ratio at birth, we will learn on the course of this lecture. Moreover, we will also look at what are the major trends in child sex ratio in India and what are the major factors determining the child sex ratio and what is the impact of such child sex ratio for Indian society. So, let us look at each one very carefully. We have already seen the sex ratio is the result of various socioeconomic and demographic factors that influences the gender composition of the population. What does it mean? Primarily, it means that there is some element of gender bias which is taking place in the society. If you examine various socioeconomic and demographic indicators by sex, you would definitely understand that most of the indicators are worsened for females as compared to males. What does it reflect? It reflects that the status of females in the society is much lower than that of males. This is also reflected if you look at the child sex ratio, particularly in the context of India. If you see in the last 5 decades, the country's development scenario has gone very drastic changes. But the question is, has this development scenario affected everyone equally? Has this development scenario has been neutral to males and females? You would also understand that the patriarchal norms remain very strong, resulting in lower status of women in our country. And there are several reasons for it, because of the high marriage cost, no economic returns, and there are several other reasons. Daughters are often considered as a net drain of potential resources within a family setting. The sex ratio, whether it is overall sex ratio, whether it is child sex ratio, it is a reflection of what is really happened at the overall context in the country, in the patriarchal society. So, let us perhaps look at the sex ratio of children more carefully to understand what is happening to the sex composition of the population. The sex ratio of a child population is the ratio between females to males in the 0 to 6 age group. 0 to 6 age group is considered here because Census of India, soon after the decadal census, publishes this vital information on the sex distribution of the population at the 0 to 6 age group. Because 0 to 6 age groups population are born 6 years prior to the census period, it tells more about what was happening in recent times compared to the overall sex ratio, which is a reflection of what happened in the society over last several decades. So, that is why, as a understanding the society for the recent times, for understanding society in terms of what is its policy impact, in understanding the gender composition in terms of the effect of various programs and policies, the child sex ratio is often emphasized in comparison to the overall sex ratio. If you look at the sex ratio in the country, it has been 962, 954 and 927, and which was continuously declining between 1981, 91 and 2001 census years. It has further declined in the period 2011, meaning there has been a continuous decline in the sex ratio, child sex ratio in the country, despite the fact that the overall sex ratio has indicated an increase in the country during the last 1 decade. There are several reasons attributed to the skewed sex ratio in the child age group: female infanticide, sex determination and the sex selective abortions, sex differentials in mortality, sex differentials in migration, all affects child sex ratio. Even more importantly, sex differentials in enumeration can also give a wrong idea about child sex ratio in any population group. Let us more look at what is the context of child sex ratio in India, the first, and then more closely look at what are its major determinants and what are its major impact on the country. The graphs, as I pointed out, tells you a drastic decline in child sex ratio which is taking place in the country over the period 1961 to 2011. These are census years where decadal population census have been recorded. It is quite surprising that the child sex ratio has always been declining, despite fact that in recent years there has been some improvement in the sex ratio at birth as well as in the sex ratio of mortality. So, it reflects the fact that there has been serious issues with regard to the gender composition of the population in India, especially at the younger ages. An imbalance in the younger ages will be carried forward for several decades to come, as this younger age group population will be in surviving for the next several decades and living with a skewed sex ratio in that particular age group for several years to come. It's also important to look at the regional patterns in the child sex ratio. Not only that child sex ratio in India is continuously declining, but the child sex ratio has been comparatively quite skewed in different segments in different parts of the country. As you have already noticed in the case of sex ratio at birth, the child sex ratio is also quite worse in certain parts of the country, particularly in the north like Haryana, Punjab, even to major extent in Bihar, and in general in south, but as compared to the south of the country. So, but if you look at in different parts of the country, we also see between 2001 census and 2011 census, there has been decline irrespective of the regions of the country. So, even in the south, there are places there has been worsening of the child sex ratio, and there are places even in the north there has been worsening, although the levels in these places has been significantly different. All these reflect the fact that there is certain serious issues with regard to child sex ratio in India, which needs to be addressed. If we need to address that, first we need to find out why there has been a decline, what are the major determinants of the decline. We also find to understand what are the major impact of this decline. Once you understand the impact and its determinants, it is possible that one would be able to address it. Let us look at the regional pattern, the state level pattern in the child sex ratio a bit more carefully. The states which has highest decline, the number of girls per 1000 boys between 2001 to 2011 has been Jammu and Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Rajasthan and Manipur. It is also given in the table what is the extent of this decline. The Jammu and Kashmir decline has been phenomenally high, and even there has been decline in Uttarakhand, Rajasthan, Manipur. So, which tells that the phenomena of the discrimination against the female children is not nearly concentrated in some parts of the country. It has now spread to many parts from the central north to other regions of the country. We should also important to look at, it is also important to look at which are the states which has gained in terms of number of girls per 1000 males. For instance, in Punjab, although Punjab still shows very low child sex ratio, there has been substantial improvement over the last decade, census decade of 2001 and 2011. The Chandigarh, which is a union territory, which is a small area, has also shown increase. Haryana, another major pocket of very worsened child sex ratio, has also shown a slight improvement in the last census decade. Similarly, Himachal Pradesh has also recorded a slight improvement. What does it all indicate if you look at the patterns of child sex ratio in India in 2011? See, this map represents, the greenest part represents a better child sex ratio, the red part represents the worst sex ratio. So, one place move from red to the orange to the green and to the dark green in order of improvement in the child sex ratio. The picture is nearly clear. The south is mainly greenish, and one part of South Kerala, the level of sex ratio, although it has declined in between 2001 and 11, it is still relatively better off. But if you look at the west and look at the north, you would see pockets of red mark or mainly the orange mark. You would hardly see a major green patches in the north, although there are certain places you would see still there are green marks. If you look at the northeast, it is primarily dark green or green. There are no patches of red or orange. It is also true to some extent in the eastern part of the country. So, it is possible also to argue that there is certain amount of concentration of the child sex ratio in certain parts of the country compared to other parts. But what is disheartening during the period of 2001 to 2011 census years was that the green patches has comparatively going down compared to the orange and red mark, meaning that the worsening of the sex ratio is spreading faster to other areas compared to what one would have anticipated earlier to the central north of the country. Let us move on to the next aspect of the child sex ratio. What are the important determinants of this child sex ratio? Why we would see less females, more masculine child sex ratio in the country compared to an anticipated child sex ratio? We have already discussed on the sex ratio at birth. We have already seen that the sex ratio at birth has been lower, has been in favor of males compared to females in many parts of this country and above the expected normal level of child sex ratio. I am sorry, against the normal expected sex ratio at birth. Sex ratio at birth should be in the vicinity of 952 females per 1000 males, but in India and many parts of the country it is far below 952 mark, and not only that, there are states which is recorded less than 900 sex ratio at birth in the country. So perhaps that is one of the important reasons which determines the child sex ratio in the country. There are also many other factors which influences child sex ratio. Child sex ratio is also the result of the sex differentials in mortality at younger ages. As we have already pointed out, it is expected that the sex ratio is the result of the differential survival chances of males and females. And in a normal population, without any preference for males and females, any discrimination against either of the sex, the males are expected to survive less than the females, or the male mortality in the child years between 0 to 6 years is expected to be far higher than the female mortality in any normal population, as males are biologically not stronger as females in any population. But there are chances that this biological strength is diminished due to allocation of resources at the household level, which is generally known as intra-household allocation of resources. If the females are not fed properly, if the females are not taken to hospital when there are health problems, if the females has been discriminated on many aspects within the family, definitely there are higher chances of female survival, female mortality in a population compared to male mortality. This can seriously affect the sex ratio in the childhood years. For instance, if you look at India, the infant mortality rate in India has been significantly lower for males compared to females in the past, although this gap has narrowed down significantly in recent years. Definitely, therefore, there has been discrimination evident in the sex ratio in the female. There has been discrimination which was evident against females within the household, both in terms of food allocation, both in terms of the health facilities, provision of the health facilities, and so on. Yet another major reason which was happening in the country in the past was female infanticide. When the sex selective abortion possibility was not available and the fetus sex selection was not possible in the past, it was considered that female infanticide was one of the major ways in which the sex ratio of the children has been influenced through deliberate killing of the female children. Although it is often argued that this has remained to be true in certain pockets of the country, it was not widely prevalent. But in the past, even prior to independent India, there has been different writings on the female infanticide happening in many contexts, many cultures, many societies in the country. Therefore, female infanticide can even significantly influence the sex ratio or the child sex ratio, although perhaps in the recent years, with the easy availability of the sex determination of the fetus, the role of female infanticide might have come down and sex selective abortions become much more normal in avoiding female birth compared to female infanticide. There is also differentials in mortality, as we have already pointed out, primarily because of the intra allocation of household resources, or because of the health facility denied to the female children as compared to the male children. In the past, it was considered that the differentials in sex ratio has been primarily due to the sex differentials in mortality, because sex ratio at birth had been rather normal. Sex differentials in migration, particularly at younger ages, is relatively very low, and therefore the major reasons for a lower child sex ratio has been attributed to the differentials in mortality, which was also evident from different data sets which is available in the country. For instance, the sample registration system data for the earlier years in the early 1970s and 80s clearly indicated that the infant and child mortality rate among females has been much higher than that of the males. This is also true for several decades later, although it is, as already pointed out, it has narrowed down considerably in recent years. So that way, the mortality differentials can really play a very important role in determining the sex composition of the population, and particularly at the younger ages. And differentials in fertility undoubtedly affect the sex ratio at birth and consequent child sex ratio. There are demographic reasons for it. There are also reasons which we have already pointed out due to sex ratio at birth. The higher order births are naturally more the higher order births usually compared to the male births, compared to the lower order births. Similarly, with the age of the mother increases, it is often found that the possibility of female birth also enhances compared to the male birth, and the birth order as well as the age of the mother are closely interlinked. Therefore, the influence of birth order in influencing the sex ratio of the child is also often noticed. All these things we have to keep in mind, that there is what is called a patriarchal economic structure in the country, because within the household there is always the resources are often controlled by the men compared to the females. Naturally, the flow of resources, etc., has also an inbuilt gender bias within the context of a family. So, the discrimination against females, what is happening both in terms of the mortality, both in terms of the sex ratio at birth, everything should be viewed in terms of the larger structure which is happening in the society, in terms of patriarchal economic structure as well as other male dominated behaviors which is evident in the society. The reflection of this patriarchal economic structure is primarily the son preference, because it is often argued that the high fertility in India which was taking place in the past was primarily because of the strong son preference among the India's population, because every family wants to achieve a desired number of children, a desired number of sons, before actually determining how many children do they need for their family. Therefore, the son preference within the context of a smaller family has also stronger bias against females, because with the smaller family norms becomes very prevalent in the society, every couple and family would like to have a minimum number of sons to be achieved compared to a minimum number of females they want in their family. Therefore, son preference is expected to be one of the important determinants of the child sex ratio in the country in compared to many other factors. It was also pointed out that the sex of the sibling, which is very close to the son preference, has a very serious impact on the child sex ratio, because for a couple, if the first order and the second order birth are females, naturally they have a strong desire to get a male birth in the subsequent order of birth. Because of this, the siblings' sex has a very serious impact on determining the subsequent sex of the child. So, the couples or the family make sure that the subsequent birth, at least they get a male birth through artificially intervening in the birth process through the fetus sex determination and also the sex selective abortions. Therefore, it is found that there is a variety of factors which influences the child sex ratio, starting from the patriarchal structure, demographic factors, economic factors, social factors, allocation of resources within the family, sex of the siblings, and so on and so forth. So, this is a complex process to understand the sex ratio of the child population. However, a change in the attitude of the society means that one has to intervene in many of these small but vitally important factors very carefully, so that a change in the overall sex ratio and child sex ratio is achieved. Let us also look at what would be the impact of this skewed sex ratio for the society as a whole. The skewed sex ratio, especially the child sex ratio which is taking place, will have a serious long-term impact for the society, because a worsening child sex ratio for the last several decades means that in the future, both in the context of marriage, both in the context of availability of women, both in the context of familial structure, the household structure, everywhere, there is a scarcity of females as compared to the male member, resulting in a serious shortage of women in the marriage market, which can perhaps expected to increase violence against women, the crimes against women. It also can lead to polyandry, it also can lead to kidnapping, and it also has the potential to have a gender insensitive society. There are also examples of female trafficking, there are also examples of rape, pornography, acid attacks, etc. taking place, several cases of violence against women taking place due to the skewed sex ratio which is taking place in the society. So, the impact is wide ranging. It is found that there are certain societies, because of the scarcity of women in the marriage market, it affects the lower sections of the society much higher than the higher sections of the society. So, the impact is far reaching, wide ranging, and unless the society is aware of this sensitive issue, it will not have any easy solution, and one has to be careful in evolving solutions for such complicated issues. Let us for the time being conclude what we have learned in this class. We have already learned what is the major determinants of the sex ratio at birth. The child sex ratio is also sort of a subset or a more encompassing aspects of the overall sex ratio as well as the sex ratio at birth. The child sex ratio has been quite skewed in India, and particularly it has been worsening over a period of time, and it's a matter of real concern for the country as well as for the society. There are particular region pattern, but it is understood that the regional pattern is also now slowly moving away, and the worsening child sex ratio is happening in many parts of the country. We have also looked at what are the major determinants of child sex ratio, and there are several forces which influence child sex ratio, both demographic, economic, social, cultural, and so on and so forth. More importantly, there is a far-reaching and wide-ranging impact of child sex ratio on the society. It also leads to a less harmonious society, which can really lead to more violence, more insensitivity against sexes, more cases of extreme cases of violence, etc., which is taking place in the society. Overall, it is important that we come back to a normal sex ratio, expected child sex ratio. Till then, it is also important that this issue is addressed by a program and policies which evolve, take into consideration all the real concerns which determines the skewed child sex ratio.